I buried my wife with my own hands and listened to people tell me I was so strong. A year later, I saw her alive, laughing on a restaurant patio with a new husband. And my children admitted they'd known for months. What would you do if you were me? Before you scroll past, I want your honest opinion on what comes next. Read this through, then tell me if I went too far. My name is Mark Gilsman. I'm 63 years old, a grandfather of 3, and I spent most of my life believing loyalty was a kind of armor. I was wrong. And the day I learned the truth, I stopped being the kind of man people could betray safely. The first time I lost Evelyn, it happened in the most convenient way possible. That should have been my clue. We'd been married 34 years. We weren't perfect, but we were stable in the way older couples become stable. Separate routines, shared history, quiet agreements about what we didn't talk about. Evelyn liked nice things and polite attention. I liked peace and a full pantry and grandkids running through my backyard like I was still young enough to chase them. Then, one July afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number and a calm voice that did not belong in a tragedy. Mr. Gilsman, this is Deputy Harlan with the County Sheriff's Office. I'm sorry to inform you. I remember the sentence as a blur, but I remember the odd details with cruel clarity. The clock in my kitchen, 2:18 p.m. The condensation ring from Evelyn's iced tea on the counter. The sound of the ceiling fan clicking like it was counting down something I didn't understand yet. They said there had been a boating accident. They said the lake was choppy. They said no one suffered. They said the body had been recovered but was not in a condition for an open viewing. Closed casket. That phrase should be engraved on a warning sign somewhere. My daughter, Melissa, arrived first. My son, Jason, arrived second. Both of them looked like they'd been running. Faces pale, breathing too fast, hands shaking. I assumed they were grieving. Now I know what shaking looks like when it's guilt. The next week passed in a kind of theatrical fog. People brought casseroles. People hugged me and said things like, "She's in a better place," as if the quality of her afterlife was something we could verify like a receipt. At the funeral home, I asked to see her one last time. The director gave me the practiced sympathy smile. "Mr. Gilsman, I don't recommend it," I insisted. He offered a compromise, a private moment with the casket lid slightly opened, from the chest up, with lighting adjusted. I was not thinking clearly. I just wanted to stop the world from being what it suddenly was. They dimmed the lights. They opened the lid. I looked down at a face that was almost Evelyn. The cheekbones were right. The hairline was right. The lipstick was her shade. But the skin looked like wax that had learned to imitate a person. I told myself grief was making me paranoid. I told myself this was what death did. I told myself I was being disrespectful to doubt. Melissa squeezed my arm too hard and whispered, "Dad, please, don't do this." At the time, I thought she meant, "Don't torture yourself." Now I understand she meant, "Don't look too closely." After the funeral, my children stayed unusually attentive. They handled paperwork, made calls, offered to organize my bills and mail. Jason brought me groceries even though I've shopped for myself since the Reagan administration. Melissa insisted on sitting with me while I sorted through Evelyn's things, as if I might collapse if left alone with a sweater. I mistook it for love. I did what loyal men do when they're hurt. I became easier to manage. Months went by. The house felt like a museum of my own life. Everything in place, nothing alive. The grandkids visited, but the joy of it carried a new edge, like laughter was trespassing. Evelyn's favorite mug stayed in the cabinet. Evelyn's perfume stayed in the bathroom drawer. Evelyn's gardening gloves stayed by the back door like she'd come back any moment and complain I'd trimmed the roses wrong. Every now and then I'd catch Melissa and Jason exchanging looks. Small ones, fast ones, the kind that end before you can name them. And then came the anniversary. 1 year to the day after I buried my wife, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. in a clean, silent house and realized there was no longer any point in pretending I was asleep beside someone. I drove to the cemetery alone. I brought fresh lilies because Evelyn always liked lilies, white ones, like a proper lady, she used to say. The grass over her grave was too perfect, too even. The headstone looked new enough to still smell like granite dust. I stood there a long time. I said out loud, "If you're gone, I forgive you. If you're not, I don't know what I'll do." Then I got back into my truck and drove toward the only place I could stand being on days like that. A small diner off Highway 9 where the waitresses call everyone Hun, and the coffee tastes like it's been simmering since the Carter administration. I sat alone at a corner table, stared at the steam rising from my mug, and tried to feel something that wasn't numbness. That's when I saw her. Not on a billboard, not on a screen, not in some dream you wake from sweating. In real life. Across the street, on the shaded patio of a restaurant too expensive for me to enjoy without feeling judged by the napkins. She was wearing a cream sundress, sunglasses, hair longer than I remembered and a different shade, like she'd tried to repaint herself. She threw her head back and laughed. That laugh hit my spine like cold water. Her left hand was on a man's forearm, confident, familiar ownership. The man leaned close, kissed her temple like he'd done it 1,000 times. And then I saw the ring. A diamond with a familiar setting. Because I bought it. 32 years ago I paid for it in cash from my overtime checks and hid it in a sock drawer like a teenager hiding cigarettes. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were feeding it. It can't be her. It's someone who looks like her. It's a cruel coincidence. Then she lifted her sunglasses for 1 second, scanned the street, and her eyes caught the light. Evelyn's eyes. The same sharp, amused look she used when she thought she'd won a private victory. I didn't walk out there screaming. I didn't faint. I didn't call the police. I did something worse, in my opinion. I watched. I sat in that diner like a statue and watched my dead wife sip wine with a new man like I was a story she'd finished reading. Then she stood, hugged him, and they walked toward a car I didn't recognize. She looked healthy, better than healthy, comfortable, alive in a way she hadn't been with me for years. I followed them at a distance. Not like a maniac, not like a movie. I kept 2 cars between us, turned when they turned, stayed calm because something inside me had gone so cold it felt clean. They pulled into the parking lot of a jewelry store. Not a grocery store, not a pharmacy. A jewelry store. The universe has a brutal sense of humor. I parked across the street, watched them go inside, and sat there long enough to understand something important. Evelyn hadn't just survived. She was spending. I took my phone out and called Melissa. When she answered, her voice was too bright. "Hi, Dad. Everything okay?" I said, very evenly. "I just saw Mom." Silence. Not confusion, not disbelief. Silence. My hand tightened around the phone. "Melissa," I said, "I'm sitting in my truck staring at your mother's back while she tries on jewelry with a man who isn't me. Say something that makes this make sense." Her voice cracked. "Dad, please don't." "Don't what?" Jason's voice came on the line, suddenly there, too fast. "Dad, where are you?" Ah, speakerphone. They were together, coordinated. I said, "Where I am doesn't matter. What matters is why my dead wife is alive and why you sound like you already knew." More silence. Then Melissa whispered, "We didn't want to hurt you." That sentence was so stupid it almost made me laugh. "I buried her," I said. I held her fake hand through a closed casket goodbye. I sat alone in this house and tried to remember her voice without crying. "But you didn't want to hurt me." Jason tried to take control, like he always does. "Dad, listen. It's complicated." "Nothing about this is complicated," I said. "It's cruel. There's a difference." Melissa started crying. Jason started pleading. I didn't raise my voice once. I asked one question. How long? Jason exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Since November, he admitted. November. 8 months. Why? I asked. Melissa said. She reached out to us. She said she was safe. She said she couldn't come back. I stared through my windshield at Evelyn's silhouette inside the jewelry store, her posture relaxed. Her head tilted like she was deciding between diamonds the way normal people decide between apples. She couldn't come back, I repeated. Jason said, She said she had to start over. She said she was miserable with you. There it was. Not a reason. An excuse. Miserable. The word landed like a verdict someone else had written. I said, And the new husband? Jason hesitated. His name is Trent. Trent Harrow. Of course it was. A name that sounds like it was invented for a man who sells confidence. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there and watched Evelyn come out of the store with a small velvet bag in her hand. Trent kissed her again. She smiled in that satisfied way that used to mean she'd gotten the better deal at a furniture store. They drove away. I didn't follow this time. I went home. Not to grieve. To inventory. Because that night I walked through my own house and understood something about myself. Every inch of that place had been built by my labor, my sacrifice, my patience, and I had been living in it like a guest. I slept 2 hours. At 7 a.m., I called in sick to the small consulting job I do 3 days a week because I suddenly had a different full-time occupation. I was going to learn the truth. Not through tears, through facts. First stop, my safe. I pulled out everything I'd been avoiding. Bank statements, insurance letters, Evelyn's death documents, the funeral home contract, the cemetery receipt. I spread it across the dining table like evidence. Because that's what it was. The first thing that hit me was the life insurance. I'd received a payout. It hadn't been enormous, but it had been enough to cover the funeral, pay off a credit card, and cushion the months where I wasn't functioning. I stared at the numbers and felt something crawl up my throat. If Evelyn was alive, then that money wasn't comfort, it was bait. And if it was bait, then somebody was fishing. I called the insurance company. I didn't accuse. I didn't threaten. I asked questions like a confused old man because people get careless when they think you're harmless. Could you confirm the policy number? I said. I'm organizing my records for the anniversary. They confirmed it. I said, could you confirm where the claim was filed from? I'm trying to keep my files tidy. They gave me a location. A small office in a neighboring county. Not the county where the accident happened. Interesting. Then I called the funeral home. I asked for the director who'd recommended I not view the body. He answered with the same gentle voice, like grief was his preferred currency. I said, I have a strange question. He paused. Mr. Gilsman, I'm here for you. I'm sure, I said. Can you tell me who handled the preparation of my wife's remains? Another pause. Then, that information is internal. I said, I'm not asking for trade secrets. I'm asking because I want to donate in your staff's honor. My wife loved people who helped families. I want to do it properly. Silence shifted. He gave me a name. I wrote it down. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend, Walter Pierce. Walter is the kind of man who can find a lost dog in a city of 1 million people. He runs a private investigation service, which sounds glamorous until you realize most of his work is catching unfaithful spouses and tracking down deadbeat dads. I hadn't spoken to him since he helped a co-worker of mine confirm her fiancé was traveling for work with a waitress in another state. Walter answered and said, Mark, you still alive? I said, that makes one of us. I need you. He didn't laugh after that. He listened. He asked 2 sharp questions. Then he said, give me 48 hours. In the meantime, I called my children. I told them to come over. Both of them arrived looking like they were walking into a storm they'd helped create. Melissa wouldn't meet my eyes. Jason tried to act like the adult in the room, which was rich, considering. I sat them down at my dining table with Evelyn's death papers spread out in front of them. I said, "You're going to tell me everything. Not your version, not your excuses, the truth." Melissa cried. Jason took a breath and spoke like he was delivering a business report. "She said she planned it," he admitted. "She said she didn't want a divorce. She said you'd fight her. She said she wanted a clean exit." "Clean," I repeated, looking at the funeral invoice. "You mean like a closed casket and a grieving husband?" Jason flinched. Melissa whispered, "She said you'd be okay. She said you were strong." I leaned back in my chair. My voice stayed calm. "And you believed her?" Jason said, "She promised. She promised she'd help us." There it was again, the real center of it. I asked, "Help you how?" Melissa wiped her face and finally looked at me. "She sent money. She said it was from Trent. She said he was successful." "How much?" Jason hesitated. "Dad?" "How much?" I repeated, and my quiet voice made them jump more than yelling ever could. Jason swallowed. "About 70,000. Over time." 70,000. Not charity. Payment. I nodded slowly. "So you sold your father's sanity for installments," Melissa said. "That's not fair." I stared at her until she looked away. Then I said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop lying to me. You're going to stop protecting her. And you're going to start understanding what it feels like to lose trust." Jason's jaw tightened. "What are you going to do?" I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I'd just decided. "I'm going to attend her wedding," I said. Melissa's face went white. "Dad, no." Jason said, She isn't having a wedding." I reached into my pocket and slid my phone onto the table. I had taken photos from across the street. Evelyn's face, Trent's face, the velvet jewelry bag. And because the universe loves cruelty, the reflection in the jewelry store window had caught a poster behind them. "Congratulations on your engagement. Dated for next month." Jason stared at it like it was a bomb. Melissa whispered, "Oh my God." I said, "Oh yes." Then I stood up and started clearing the table, very calmly gathering the papers like I was done with a crossword puzzle. Melissa said, "Dad, please don't do anything crazy." I said, "Crazy was faking a death. I'm just going to RSVP." That night, Walter called. "Mark," he said, "your wife is not dead." "I noticed," I said. He didn't take the joke. "She's using a different name. Evelyn Gilsman is deceased on paper. But the woman you know is living as Lena Hart. She has a new driver's license. New social security number is the hard part. But I can tell you this. She's been working with someone who knows how to build an identity." "Trent," I said. Walter made a sound like he'd found a rotten floorboard. "Trent Harrow is not his original name either. He has a history. Not prison history. Paper history. The kind where people disappear and reappear with fresh smiles." I sat at my kitchen table and felt my grief mutate into something sharper. "Do you have an address?" I asked. Walter gave it to me, a gated townhouse community 30 minutes away. Then he said, "One more thing." "What?" Walter paused. "Your kids weren't just hiding it. They were helping. They signed something." My stomach tightened. "What did they sign?" "A non-disclosure agreement," he said. "Not court-filed, private. But it's why they've been terrified. They think they'll get sued if they talk." I laughed once. It wasn't happy. It was disbelief wearing a grin. My children, my grown children, signing secrecy papers about their mother's fake death. I thanked Walter and hung up. Then I made coffee. Because anger is easier to handle when your hands are busy. I had 2 goals. 1, make Trent understand exactly who he married. 2, Make Evelyn understand that a clean exit comes with a mess when you circle back. And I wanted to do it without lawsuits, courtrooms, or years of legal nonsense. I wanted the kind of consequence you can't appeal. Social consequence. Personal consequence. The kind that follows you into grocery aisles and church pews. So I built my revenge the way I built my life. Quietly. Carefully. With receipts. First, I stopped being generous. Not with grandkids. Never with grandkids. With my children. For years I'd helped. Little things. A car insurance payment here. A short-term loan there. Money for braces for my grandson Tyler. Money for dance lessons for my granddaughter Paige. I didn't track it because I didn't want to feel like love was an invoice. Now I tracked everything. I called my bank and changed passwords and security questions. I removed authorized users. I shut down any account access that wasn't mine. I didn't yell at my children. I didn't punish them with dramatic speeches. I simply took back the invisible support beams holding up their comfortable lies. When Jason called, panicked, because his mortgage auto payment didn't go through, I said, "That's strange." He said, "Dad, what did you do?" I said, "I adjusted my budget." I'm a widower, remember? I have to be responsible. He went quiet. Melissa called next day, voice shaking. "Dad, I can't cover the daycare bill this week." I said, "Then you'll need a new plan." She whispered, "Are you doing this because of Mom?" I said, "I'm doing this because of you." Then I did the second part. I became a ghost. I stopped answering calls unless they were about the kids. I stopped attending family dinners. I stopped showing up as the dependable grandfather who swallows hurt and shows love anyway. I let my children feel what absence tastes like. Not because I wanted them ruined, because I wanted them awake. They thought their biggest fear was me finding out. They were wrong. Their biggest fear was me deciding I didn't belong in the story anymore. Weeks passed. Walter kept feeding me information. Addresses, names, patterns. Evelyn, Lena, was building a new social circle. She attended a country club. She hosted charity brunches. She wore a new life like a tailored blazer. And she was planning a wedding. A small one. Exclusive. Private. Of course it was. Because nothing says romance like hiding the groom's bride from anyone who might recognize the corpse. Then, in the middle of all this, I got my second shock. The second hook. It came from my grandson Tyler, who is 10 and has the kind of honest eyes that make adults nervous. He was at my house one Saturday eating peanut butter crackers at my kitchen table when he said, "Grandpa, why does Mom cry when Grandma calls?" My hand froze. "Grandma calls?" I asked, keeping my voice light like this was normal conversation. Tyler nodded. "On Mom's secret phone." I set my coffee down very carefully. "What secret phone?" I asked. Tyler pointed toward the pantry like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "The one in the cereal box." I stared at him. He stared back, confused by my sudden stillness. He said, "I wasn't supposed to tell." And right then I realized something that made my skin go cold. Evelyn wasn't just alive. She was still controlling them, still managing them, still keeping her hooks in my family like nothing had changed. I thanked Tyler, hugged him, and told him he did the right thing. Then I went to my pantry. I did not find a phone, because Melissa had already panicked and removed it. But I found something else. A box of cereal pushed too far back, and behind it, taped to the shelf underside, was a folded piece of paper. A handwritten schedule. Call times. Days. Short notes like, "Remind Mark about doctor." Push assisted living idea again. Trent says don't spook him. Assisted living. They weren't just hiding her. They were still following her instructions. They were softening me up, preparing me. The grief I'd been swimming in suddenly snapped into a hard, clean shape. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a plan. And it was ongoing. I sat down on the pantry floor, paper in my hand, and laughed again. A dry laugh, like a door hinge that hasn't been oiled. Because the irony was almost poetic. Evelyn had faked her death to escape me. And she still wanted to control me like I was her property. That's when my revenge became simple. I stopped chasing her. I set a trap she couldn't resist. Evelyn loved attention like some people love oxygen. So I gave her a stage. I created something called the Evelyn Gilsman Memorial Fund. It wasn't a real nonprofit. I wasn't defrauding anyone. I wasn't collecting money. It was a private remembrance gathering I hosted at a community hall in my neighborhood. A night to honor Evelyn's memory and celebrate her impact and share stories. The invitations were polite, tasteful, a little dramatic. I mailed them to old friends, family members, people from church. And I mailed one to Trent Harrow's townhouse, addressed to Evelyn Gilsman, because I wanted to see what would happen when the dead received mail. Then I called Melissa and Jason and told them they were coming. Jason said, "Dad, why are you doing this?" I said, "Because I'm grieving." He didn't argue after that. Evelyn responded faster than I expected. 2 days later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Silence. Then a woman's voice, careful and altered like she was wearing a mask made of tone. "Mark?" My stomach clenched. I said, "Hello, Evelyn." Her breath caught. There it was. The moment she realized I wasn't confused. I wasn't processing. I wasn't weak. She said, "You're going to ruin everything." I smiled at my kitchen wall like it was a mirror. "You ruined it when you died," I said. Her voice sharpened. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You're a widow in my house and a bride in someone else's." She tried a different approach, soft, wounded. "Mark, I had to leave. You were suffocating me." I almost admired the audacity. "I suffocated you so badly you needed a closed casket," I said. She snapped, "Don't do this." "Come to the memorial," I said. "Say goodbye properly." "You're insane." "No," I said. "I'm the only sane person in this situation." Then I hung up. And I did the final funny part. Not funny like a joke. Funny like irony with teeth. I went to the memorial hall early, dressed in my best black suit, and set up a table near the entrance. On that table I placed a guest book, a bouquet of white lilies, and a framed photo of Evelyn. Not the photo most people knew. Not the flattering church portrait. The photo from the jewelry store across the street. Her smiling with Trent. Alive, well-fed, bright-eyed. I placed it face down under a black cloth, like a magician hiding the trick. People arrived. They hugged me. They told me they were proud of me for being strong. I thanked them politely. Melissa arrived with red eyes. Jason arrived stiff and pale. They sat in the front row like guilty children. And then Trent arrived, alone. He walked in like he owned the air. Tall, polished, smile too smooth. He approached me with a hand extended. "Mark Gilsman," he said. "I'm Trent." I shook his hand. I said, "I know." His smile faltered for half a second. "I'm sorry for your loss." I looked him dead in the eye. "You mean the first one or the second one?" I asked. Confusion flickered. I gestured toward a chair near the front. "Sit. You'll want a good view." He didn't like being told what to do. But curiosity is a leash, and I had a firm grip on it. The hall filled, quieted. I stepped up to the microphone, and I began the memorial exactly the way they expected. I spoke about Evelyn as my wife. I spoke about the years. I spoke about the first time she held my hand after Jason was born. I spoke about her laughter. And while I did, I watched Trent's posture relax. He started to believe this was going to be harmless. Then I said, There's something I want to share tonight, something Evelyn would have wanted, because she always loved a grand reveal. A ripple of gentle laughter. I reached down, pulled the black cloth off the frame, and turned the photo toward the room. The air changed instantly. A few gasps, a few confused murmurs. Melissa made a small choking sound. Jason's face went gray. Trent stared at the photo like it was a weapon. I said into the microphone, calm as Sunday morning, "That was taken 3 weeks ago." Silence slammed down. I continued. "I buried my wife a year ago. Closed casket, no questions asked. I grieved her. I honored her. I trusted my children when they told me it was real." People began turning their heads toward Melissa and Jason like sunlight finding rot. I held up Evelyn's death documents. Then I held up the engagement poster photo I'd printed. Then I held up one more thing Walter had gotten me. A copy of Lena Hart's driver's license photo. Same eyes, same smile, different name. I said, "Evelyn Gilsman is dead. Lena Hart is not. And tonight I invited one special guest so we could all share in the miracle." Trent stood up so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. His voice was sharp. "Where is she?" I looked at him with something almost like pity. "You tell me," I said. "Because you've been kissing a corpse, son." The room erupted, not screaming, worse, whispering. People grabbing phones. A woman near the back muttered, "Is this real?" A man near the aisle said, "This has to be some—" "No. That's her." Trent pushed forward, jaw clenched. "She told me you were abusive. She told me you were unstable. She told me she escaped." I nodded slowly. "And did she tell you she escaped by staging a death and letting her husband bury a stranger?" Trent's face twisted with horror. Then came the final blow, the one I didn't even have to deliver. Evelyn walked in. Late. Dressed beautifully. Because she couldn't resist seeing what kind of attention her memory was getting. She stepped through the doorway, saw the crowd, saw the photo, saw Trent's face, and froze like an animal realizing the trap already snapped shut. For one heartbeat the whole room held its breath. Then someone, an older woman from church, bless her, whispered loudly, "Oh my Lord, that's Evelyn." Evelyn's lips parted, searching for language. Trent turned toward her slowly, like his body was afraid of what his eyes would confirm. He said, "Lena?" Evelyn swallowed. And in that moment, all the cleverness she'd built collapsed into one stupid human truth. She had been caught. I stepped away from the microphone and walked toward her. People parted like I was carrying fire. I stopped 3 feet from Evelyn and said, quietly enough that only the closest people heard, but loud enough that the room leaned in, "You look well for someone we buried." Her eyes filled with rage, not remorse. "You did this on purpose," she hissed. I smiled. "I did it in black tie," I said. "I wanted to show respect." A few people laughed, not because it was funny, but because shock needs somewhere to go. Trent's voice broke. "You're married?" Evelyn said, "It's complicated." He barked a single, bitter laugh. "You died." Evelyn snapped, "I did what I had to do." Trent stepped back from her like she smelled rotten. "You used me." She reached for him, desperate now. "Trent, please." He flinched away, and that flinch was the tangible consequence she couldn't talk her way out of. Then the social consequences followed, fast and ugly. Phones were out. People were already messaging others. Names were being spoken like warnings. A woman Evelyn had once hosted for brunch stared at her with disgust. A man in a blazer shook his head and said, "This is sick." Evelyn's new life began dying right there in that community hall, not with a closed casket, with open eyes. Trent turned to me, voice low. "Did she take money from you?" I said, "She took a year of my life." He nodded once, like he understood the weight. Then he looked at Evelyn and said, "I'm done." Evelyn's face crumpled for half a second. Real fear, real loss, before rage rebuilt her mask. She turned on me. "You think you won? You ruined me." I leaned in slightly, voice calm, almost gentle. "No," I said. "You ruined you. I just made sure everyone could see it." Then I took the last step, the humorous part, delivered with a straight face. I reached into my pocket and handed her a small envelope. She snatched it like it was ammunition. Inside was a printed program from the memorial. On the front, beneath her name, it read, "In loving memory of Evelyn Gilsman, beloved wife, taken too soon, returned even sooner." Under that, in smaller letters, "Reception immediately following. Please enjoy the coffee. It's been sitting a while." The room went still. Then someone laughed again, short, startled, because it was absurd, because it was cruel, because it was exactly what she deserved. Evelyn's hands shook as she held the paper. Her eyes darted around the room, calculating exits, assessing damage, looking for allies. She found none. Melissa stood up, crying harder now, and whispered, "Mom, why?" Evelyn didn't answer her daughter. Jason said, "Mom, you promised." Evelyn snapped, "You both wanted the money. Don't pretend you're innocent." That was the final nail. My children flinched like she'd slapped them in public. Because she had. And in one sentence, Evelyn burned the last bridge she still had. Trent walked out without looking back. 2 women followed him, leaving like they didn't want to breathe the same air as Evelyn. Then the rest began to move, quietly, quickly, with that polite American cruelty where people don't scream, they just abandon you. Evelyn stood alone in the center of the hall, alive and exposed. I stepped back to the microphone, looked at the remaining stunned faces, and said, "Thank you all for coming. I appreciate your support. Please drive safely." Then I turned to Evelyn one last time. I said, "You wanted a clean exit. Here it is." And I walked away. Afterward, the consequences continued without any courtroom drama. Trent dumped her within days. He had enough pride to hate being made a fool, and enough sense to realize marrying a woman who could fake her death meant trusting her would be a lifetime gamble. Her country club membership vanished, not officially, not dramatically, just socially. Invitations stopped. Calls stopped. People stopped pretending she was safe. Evelyn tried calling me. I didn't answer. She tried calling the kids. They did answer at first, because old habits are hard to kill. But then she got cruel with them too, blaming them for my public stunt. And my children finally understood what I had lived with for years. Evelyn's love always came with strings, and when you pulled wrong, it strangled. Melissa came to my house 2 weeks later, eyes swollen. She said, "Dad, I'm sorry." Jason came the next day. He didn't cry. He just looked tired, like his own conscience had finally caught up. He said, "We thought we were protecting you. We were protecting ourselves." I nodded. Yes. They expected yelling. They expected punishment. Instead, I gave them something worse. I gave them responsibility. I said, "You're going to rebuild trust with actions, not words." And then I made the only promise that mattered. "I won't punish the grandchildren for your choices," I said, "but I won't be managed again, ever." As for Evelyn, last I heard she moved out of the gated townhouse. Trent kept it. Of course he did. Men like that don't lose twice. Evelyn took an apartment across town under her new name, and for the first time in her life she had to budget like a normal person. No lavish brunches, no curated social life, no husband to drape like jewelry. Just a woman who died once and learned that coming back doesn't mean you get your old life returned with it. Sometimes I lie awake and think about the cemetery, about that headstone with her name. about the lilies I placed on a grave that never held her. And I feel something that isn't grief anymore. It's clarity. So tell me, was I wrong for exposing her in public, the way she exposed my heart in private? What would you have done if you buried your spouse, and a year later found out you were the only one at the funeral who didn't know it was a performance?
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.